later perceived as some sort of filtering device. These creatures apparently did use their mouths or something. And he had other encounters throughout his childhood, as so many of the abductees do, and I think the culminating events of childhood experiences in Casey occurred at the ages of 12 and 13 in Kansas. In the first one, he was implanted with a device of some sort that started through his left nostril, and he felt the pain and the pressure when it was penetrated into the frontal brain area. In the second, he was forced, when he was paralyzed and unable to do anything about it, to have a sexual encounter with an unusual female being. She had wispy white hair, dark eyes, and somewhat more humanoid features than any of the other creatures that he had seen up to this point. In the background, watching this, was the old one. This has recurred in several instances. Whatever has gone on, the old one has been there as part of this, observing or participating. My experiences also began in childhood. I remember suddenly finding myself outside in the dark one night, which is not something a 5-year-old is often able to get away with. At the age of 5 or 6, somewhere between there, standing beside a very tall creature, at least from my perspective, it was a tall creature, that I thought looked like a gigantic grasshopper or praying mantis. It was holding my hand and telling me that it was my mother. And all I remember consciously, and have always remembered consciously, was screaming and crying and saying, "No, you're not. No, you're not." After that, the memory of that encounter is blank. But the incident stayed in my conscious memory for years. I tried to call it a nightmare, and I did have nightmares about it recurrently in childhood. But that first night, I knew I was awake, I knew I was outside, and then this being was beside me. Without going into all of the details of the experiences my family and my friends and I have been through, which I hope you'll have a chance to look at in the book, I would like to talk about a couple of events that are not in the material in the book. And one reason is they were not brought to my attention until after the manuscript was finished. These occurred in my early 20s. And to anyone not acquainted, I'd like to make this statement before we begin. To anyone not acquainted with the abduction scenario, these incidents may appear to have nothing to do with UFOs or ETs, but given the totality of the experiences that I and many others have had, I believe that these are related directly to this experience. And to this day, I have absolutely no memory of these things happening. My family and my friends, however, recall them very clearly. I have their words to go on, not my own memories. On 2 different occasions, 4 friends, who I'm still friends with since those days, tell me that I came to see them in hysterics because I couldn't remember where I had been for a large stretch of time. One was for half a day, and another time was for 24 hours. I was very, very upset, especially because I had a small child, a 3-year-old child at this time, and had no idea where that child was while I was listening or what was going on with that child. And my husband at that time told me, much, much later, like I said, after I finished the manuscript, that in 1970 I apparently became pregnant. I was on birth control pills. I became pregnant. And 2 months after discovering this, in the middle of the night, something apparently very bizarre happened. I have no memory of this, I just have this account, in which something was done to me that resulted in the bed being so soaked in blood that he threw away the sheets on the bed rather than even trying to clean them. That I was in great pain and very hysterical, and he tried his best to get me to go to a hospital. I utterly refused, and I was no longer pregnant after this. I have no memory of this. I believe these accounts. I trust the accounts of these people I've known and lived with for so long. But the trauma, apparently, of these events must have been so great that I pushed them completely out of my consciousness. And this, too, I've found in the research happens in many cases. In fact, sometimes the trauma from these early childhood abductions leaves the victims with virtually no conscious memory of several years of their lives. In a couple of recent cases, for example, 2 people that we have begun working with, neither can remember anything before the age of 8 years old. There's no sign of sexual abuse in these situations, if you were thinking about that automatically, which I know does come up. When they look at family photographs of themselves and their family members from these years, they say it means nothing to them. They say it's like looking at photos from And of course, there were other inexplicable incidents throughout both of our lives, of which we had some conscious memories, but no understanding. And then in December of 1987, our relationship with these beings apparently changed. My husband was abducted half a block from the house we lived in North Texas. A deep incision was made. It's a very, very bizarre setting, by the way, and I went into detail in the book about this. It's not your typical abduction scene. A deep incision was made into his upper thigh, and he was told by his abductors it was time to remember. You're going to remember now, they told him. Well, it took 5 months for those memories to surface. And up to that point, we never knew what was behind all these odd things we'd been through throughout our lives. But now we were beginning to learn something about what we were dealing with. And the knowledge, frankly, was reality-shattering, as I'm sure some of you out there can sympathize with. We had never read anything about UFOs other than the occasional headlines in the papers. I remember the Pascagoula incident, for instance. I remember in 1965 or 66 when there were a lot of reports in the media about sightings. Apparently there was a plaque going on at that time. But we rapidly educated ourselves on this subject and eventually were able to take advantage of a good investigator. It did involve some hypnosis. Some of the things were not recalled through hypnosis. Some of them were enhanced. Some of them we were totally unaware of surfaced through hypnosis. And that investigation prompted me to start keeping a journal. I'm a writer, I'm a teacher. This is the sort of thing we do. As a researcher, you keep your data. Originally, this journal was just for our experiences. I soon had to expand it to include those of my son and my daughter-in-law and several friends because this thing apparently exploded in our small group. And that journal is the basis for the book that Ellen told you about, Into the Fringe, covering about a year of our experiences, the first year of our knowledge of these. I hope you have a chance to look at it. Now, the stories that emerged as we began investigating this were frankly just unacceptable to us. As I told you, my husband is in computers. He has a very, very responsible job. He is one of the best in his field. If this were to be known to the people who entrust him with the care of millions of dollars worth of material on a daily basis, we were very afraid of what might happen to our income. I was a college teacher, English and literature, and these were the things that mattered. These were the things we knew about. This was a shock. We could not accept it in the beginning. We fought very hard, in fact, to discredit these accounts of our own because this was not the world we'd always known. There was no room for these things.